Okay, without further ado, welcome to round 2 of the New Zealand Schools Debating Championships. Congratulations to both teams for making it this far. Today's motion is this House believes that government should not require... Oh, that is the wrong one, sorry. What is the motion? This House believes that for most personal relationships, for example, family, romantic, friendship, how they end matters more than how they lasted. Speaking times are between 7 to 8 minutes, with POIs between the 1st and 7th minute. So I'll give you one clap at 1 minute and 7 minutes, and then 2 claps at 8 minutes. For leaders' reply speeches are 4 minutes long. I'll clap once at 3 minutes and twice at 4 minutes. And with that, I welcome up first Af to start the debate.
If I talk like this, you guys back can hear me, right? Nice. Starting my debate in 3, 2, 1. Relationships are an incredibly important part of a person's life, and the way they end determines how they affect you for the rest of your life. So, what makes a relationship important to you? It is how it impacts you, how you learn from it, and the memories that you keep for your life. And we believe, as the affirming team, that the ending to this significantly and is the most important way that affects all of these at the end of the relationship and for the greatest impact it has on your life. So, for my first point, I'll be talking about how these endings, they weigh the memories and they weigh how you will remember and how you'll be impacted by these relationships. So, if your relationship, we'll say a friendship to start, ends in a good way, say they move to another town, you stop seeing them as much, but you were great friends, and you might still occasionally be in contact, but you lose that close friendship you once had. This is a very good ending to a relationship. And this means that all your memories, you'll look back on them fondly. Those activities that you used to do, like mountain biking, like going to certain restaurants, like going to a pub, those things become core things that you remember. You look back and think, wow, I enjoyed that. That was great. Those are impacts to your life. Those memories are positive. However, we look at a negative ending. You had a big fight over something. You end up hating each other. You now look back on these memories. You can't go to those same places. You can't do those activities. It reminds you of something that has gone horribly wrong. These are incredibly drastic differences and show clearly where the ending impacts these relationships. In the same with the impacts, something that you and your friend might do, you might no longer do after you hate them. It can drastically change your life in that way. You might end up changing schools, you might change universities, you might change jobs because of these things. These are undeniably important things which come from these relationships such as friendships. If your boss who you're friends with, you suddenly hate him, you are no longer going to work with him, and this will drastically change the shape of your life. I'll take a POI.
Do you think when most relationships end, it's quite emotionally symbolic?
I believe that the most important relationships in your life always end they almost always end in a significant way. A relationship that simply fizzles out is not going to be a very important one to you anyway. Most of your long-term, your important relationships are the ones that are going to be having these big endings. You are not going to lose a 10-year relationship in some small thing. It is either going to be a large fight or something significant which is going to have a drastic emotional impact on you. Which is a great thing to my next part, which is talking about the mediocre ending, which may have very little impact, but this in itself is showing the ending's impact. If this ending has a drastic, because of the way that it doesn't change your emotional sphere as much, it's showing that there is this change between the endings, and if it ends in this way, it's having that impact on your emotions. You're remembering it more as a memory, and you are more likely to forget it. Whereas, if you had a more impactful, if it was a big fight, or if it ended really well, you're going to remember that differently, and that is a greater impact, and it matters more. So, if we are looking at another example of family, and taking people for granted, a lot of the time, people don't talk to their grandparents very much, and they don't talk to their parents as much after they move out. It's only when they lose them, and only when they are gone, that you will truly think back and think, oh, I should have talked to them more. I miss them. They did so much for me that I didn't even realize. This ending is important, because without this, you don't realize how much they truly happened. Whereas if you were to say you stopped talking to your grandmother because you didn't agree with her or something like this, that is a very different ending. You are not going to have that same emotional response of, wow, I wish that she was still around. This is a drastic impact that this end has on the person. It has both on their impact and on the emotions and the memories that they keep. So, relationships, the ending of them is where you grow and where you reflect on what went wrong or what went right. So, during an abusive relationship, for example, you often will not notice this. You will not notice these signs because you love them. You like this person. You don't want to believe that they're bad. The growth of this relationship happens at the end, and the ending of this is important. If this ends because you realize that this was bad, or versus if they leave you, it will be a drastic impact on you. And this is showing where this ending has a place in this debate. So, before I go on to my third, I would like to take another POI if you have one.
In a toxic relationship, do you think it's good for people to remember they've had a large fight and you literally broke apart and split apart and it emotionally harmed everyone?
I don't believe that it is good for them to remember that, but it's not good for them to remember any of the toxic relationship. It is about the impact of this. And if you can end that relationship in a better way for yourself, if you can be the one to stand up and leave, I believe that is a good ending that has a much greater impact than them beating you and sending you to hospital and then leaving via that. This type of ending has a drastic impact. This is where this happens. It is where how this person reacts, how they end this, that frames how they will move on with their lives. If you can finally stand up for yourself and leave this person who's been abusive to you, you are grown as a person. And this is going to drastically change your life compared to if they left you and you were lost without someone who you might think that you rely on. And this is where your life changes. So, the opposing team is likely to talk about how long relationships the impact of these will long outweigh what happens in these short relationships. But there are 2 points which show that this is actually much further on our side of the house than it is theirs. These long relationships are the ones that have the most important endings. And entirely, if they have lots of impact, it is where the ending matters the most. If you have a very long, very good relationship, and it ends poorly, those are no longer good memories. You are not going to look back on the time that you went scuba diving with your ex and think, wow, that was great. If you had a huge fight and it ended up in tears and you were crying in your room alone for weeks. This is where it is clear that the ending frames what this is. You could end a great relationship with a friend, and remember those things. You could remember, oh, I loved going to that restaurant back when he lived here. I loved going to that park. Oh, remember when we used to go mountain biking up there? Instead of, oh, whenever I go there now, I think of how horrible they were to me, how much I hate them now, and how much it has ruined that activity for me. This is where that ending, again, it frames these emotions, it frames your memories, and it frames how you are going to live the rest of your life. So, moving on to an example of this, which is clearly showing this thing. So if I'm a parent and I have a child, the way that my relationship with that child ends is there's a few ways that can end. One of them is that I die. I grow up, I see my child go and do these things, they keep in contact with me, and eventually I die. That is the end of the relationship. In that way, I will be happy because I've seen my child do all these things. However, if that child was to die before me, that is a drastic change to the ending of this relationship. It is a much bigger impact to me, and it changes entirely how that went. You no longer are remembering, oh, they did so well, it is what they could have been. It is changing those memories, it is changing that impact on your life, and has a very drastic difference to the original ending. Or if that child was to leave you for another reason, or if you were the child to leave for another reason, such as you had abusive parents or something, that is a very different way of leaving if you can be honest yourself and how you choose to end that relationship. Whereas, is it that they eventually leave you, or is it you leaving them? This ending matters. It's not like, no matter what happens, it's going to be the same. Whatever you do at the end is going to frame all of the impact. So even if the impact of a relationship are great, it is the ending that shows that is where these matters come from. It is where the framing of these come from, and it is where the impact of the relationship is at its greatest. So we've shown you that the endings are the most important things, and they frame every other part of the relationship. Without the ending, it's much less important. And when something has a strong ending, it is when it is the most impactful, and it is when it will show the greatest impact on the rest of your life. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for this speech and invite the first Nick to come up and start your team's case.
I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Look, the ending of a relationship does affect how you perceive the relationship, but we think that what matters in this debate is the way you are changed by this relationship, and we think that happens when you consider how the relationship went, the impacts that your mother had on you. Because when I lose my mum, I am incredibly impacted by her death. But the reason I appreciate her, the reason I valued her so much was because of the positive and the relationship that I had with her in the first place. That is why she is so incredibly important to me. I'm going to be doing 3 things in my speech today. First, some setup. Second of all, on why the duration of the relationship has a larger impact than how the relationship ended. And third of all, just a quick thing on why you are happier and better off when you actually analyze the entire duration of the relationship. First, on setup, then 2 things. Firstly, what does the relationships that we are looking to look like? A, we think that they do tend to be quite close relationships. We define these as friendships, romantic relationships, maybe familial relationships. But secondly, B, we think that most personal relationships tend to end in a way that is relatively mid. That is, when you move away with your friend, when you get too busy and you stop speaking as much to your parents, when you move away from your home, we think that this just tends to happen because your life circumstances change, because it is just harder to keep up the relationships the same way that you could before. But most importantly, we want to frame that the way that most relationships break off do not tend to be hugely dramatic. That is because when I still have good associated with the other person, if we had a good relationship in the first place, I just don't want to harm them by breaking it off in this incredibly dramatic way. Or maybe the reason I entered this relationship in the first place was because I genuinely liked them as a person, and I just don't have that much bad things to say about them. So this means that when the relationship tends to be generally good, that the way that the relationship lasted just tends to matter more than how it ended, because it just, the way that it went just had this bigger impact on me, and the way it ended was relatively mediocre. But secondly, what is the difference in this debate? What we want to prove is that what goes on in the relationship changes you more than how it ended, that you are genuinely better and happier when you consider the duration of the relationship rather than the ending. What we think is exclusive to this debate is that in our side we are able to think back onto the entire relationship, and you are able to reflect on the entire duration, how it went, your experiences, whereas on their side you are only able to look at the ending, to look at the breakup and how that impacted you. On to my first point then, on why the duration of the relationship has a large impact on you. And the thesis at this point is that when a relationship ends, you take away more about how the relationship went. The first thing I want to prove then is how the end of the relationship changes you is very, very small. And note that this responds to the idea that the ending is the only point in time when you actually see the entirety of this debate, and that the rest of the relationship apparently just has no matter effect on you in the future whatsoever. I have 4 responses to this. The first thing is that when most clean breakups happen, you do not think much about the ending at all. When I drift away from my friend, when I drift away from my family, or maybe when I lose a parent and I just have to cope with the loss, in the long run, I don't actually notice this drifting away from relationship, because it's just something that I didn't notice because I naturally grew away from them. Instead, when I think back on them, I focus more on the actual relationship and the good times that we had. But second of all, even when the end is messy, we think that just the lessons that you gain from this relationship tends to be extremely marginal. Because when the end is messy, you are very emotionally charged. And when you are very emotionally charged, it means that whenever you reflect back on the relationships, you only think about your own feelings, how you felt during this relationship, and not about the actual arguments that happened or the reason it ended. And more so than that, you cannot have the details on the specifics of ending, because often you don't comprehend how your partner is feeling. You only understand your own emotions, your own very heightened and dramatic emotions then. You should believe then at the end of this point that when you break away from your partners, the lessons that you actually gain are taken from what happened during the relationship, the toxic moments, instead of just the very large break off and the very, very dramatic split up. I'll take that point.
What do you think is more important to someone? that has followed like Jesus for their whole life. They get sent to heaven. 2 years after being in heaven, they get kicked out and go to hell. What do you think is more important for them? Being in heaven for 2 years or going to eternal damnation?
I do not understand the purpose of your question and how this has to do with this debate. Because what we are talking about is that a person who has had this very long-lasting relationship is impacted more by the actual experiences they had during the relationship than how they felt towards the very end. And the third thing I want to point out is most relationships tend to end quite similarly. When breakups are very dramatic, they tend to end with shouting, they tend to end with crying. That is something that is almost expected. So when you actually think of these moments, they just don't impact you as much because you often have other relationships that broke off in the same way, and they tend to just merge together as one very sad blob of emotion. But when you think about this sadness that accrue, that is something that you just try to avoid, right? Because when you are going about your day-to-day life, you don't want to think about your sad moments. Instead, you want to think about like the actual things that went on, about the drama that went on during the relationships, not just like the messy shouting towards the very end. But fourthly, we think that when the end of the relationship comes, it only comes with an ending of the relationship, with the emotions, and not an understanding of why this breakup happened. And we think that the feelings that you experience are relatively have a very short-term impact on you, because in the long term they tend to be weighed out by more proximate emotions. The human brain is wired to move on from very traumatic experiences because that is the way you grow, that is the way that you actually survive, because you cannot dwell on the past too much. More so than that, you only gain comprehension of the relationship when you look at the entire relationship. When you look at the variety of memories and events that happen and you think of your reasons for breaking it off. That is why when you look at your toxic relationship with your boyfriend, you are able to see like the manipulative moments, the possessive moments, along with the ones where they were sweet talking to you and trying to persuade you that you were very good. Whereas if you only look at the ending, you only look at the shouting, you only look at the emotions that are expected out of all breakups, you are just unable to ever find any lessons from that. Secondly, on this point then, why the majority of impacts to the changes of you comes from the duration of this relationship. Know that during very important relationships, the duration of the relationship changes who you are as a person. It's when your boyfriend is incredibly possessive and he stopped talking to other people. It's when you withdraw from others and you lose your spark. It's when you feel really shamed about your body and you just feel really insecure. That's what changes during the relationship. But when you think about the relationship's ending, you think about shouting, you think about arguing, you do not think of what happened during the relationship. Therefore, you should believe that when you end this relationship, when you think about the end, you only think about the emotions that happened when you ended. And you just don't gain any comprehension from the rest of this relationship. You don't gain any lessons from there whatsoever. On to my second point, and very quickly, on why you're just happier and better off when you analyze what happened during the relationship. Firstly, the way you perceive the relationship is better because you are more emotionally insulated. When you are able to think of the good moments that happened during that relationship, when you think of like the good moments that you had with your mum before you died, it just means that these are the things you tend to dwell on more because these are the things that actually proximately impacted you. But second of all, we think in the long run, you tend to dwell less on how a relationship ended. Because when I lose my mum, I don't want to think constantly about how she died. Eventually, I will move on from that grief. I will continue on with my life. And whenever I think of her and the impact that she had on my life, I think about how present she was during my childhood, how she was always there for me, how she was always there to support me. This means that the long-term impacts of loss just phase whenever it is a good relationship or a bad one. The actual impacts of the relationship, the lessons you earn, comes from what you learn, comes from what you experienced from the duration of the relationship. I'm so proud to negate.
I thank the speaker for their speech and invite second act to come up and continue their team's case.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. 3 things to do in my speech. Firstly on framing, secondly on why duration doesn't matter as much as the ending does, and then thirdly on whether you're going to dwell on the good things or whether you're going to dwell on the bad ending. Okay then, firstly on to framing. We hear from their side of the house that most relationships end really mediocrely, they just fizzle out, they don't tend to bang. We also hear from their side of the house that most relationships are going to be like relatively big, they're going to be a closed off relationship, so you're going to gain lots of positive benefits from the experiences you have throughout that relationships. Lots of responses to that. Firstly, responding to whether they end like really well or whether they're like in an explosion or whether they just fizzle out. We think if they do just fizzle out, then we've got like mutually on both sides of the house, that relationship probably doesn't matter. As we said at Michael, we think that relationships that just fizzle out are probably ones that you don't really care about that much. We think that when you have a strong bond and connection to someone, you are going to need to have a significant impact in your life to be able to break that bond. With my friend, I don't think I'm ever going to stop being friends with him unless either he just completely disappears from my life, which is obviously going to be traumatic. If he leaves the country, I'm going to think about like going to have like separation anxiety from the rest of my life. I'm going to have permanence anxiety for the rest of my life. This is really, really impactful. If he like dies, then obviously that's impactful. That's really, really bad. But in all other cases, it's going to be a case where I go from liking my friend to not liking my friend. For that to happen, it can't just be we separate interests, because it's not like we stop being invested in the same things, because I've invested so much time into this person's life that I'm probably not going to matter whether he picks up mountain biking or whether he picks up chess, and I don't like mountain biking and chess. It's going to be something fundamental where he does something that means that I can no longer continue to be friends with him. I think that means that the ending is going to be significant, because for it to end in any way, I have to discover that this person is a bad person, or he has to discover that I'm a bad person. At that point, as they already defined, there's going to be a lot of charged emotions. It's going to be heated. It's going to be angry. People are going to shout. This is going to affect me for the rest of my life. Why then is this going to affect me for the rest of my life more than the happy memories? Firstly, as we said at Michael, all those memories are going to be framed by either the fact that he left, which is, as I said, is going to give you permanent anxiety and is going to make you think back for the rest of your life. When you're 30, you probably don't remember your 10-year-old friends. You probably have deep-set psychological trauma about the fact they died or left. But if it ends really, really crazily, then what you're looking back all those memories, you can't gain the positive benefits they try to accrue. You can't gain anything. Why can you not gain those positive benefits? Because every time you think, oh, that was really, really nice, you're going to think, but actually, he was a bad person. Was that real? Etc., etc. You're not going to be able to look back on these things. During a relationship, you also can't learn from the bad things they do. We hear from their side of the house that you're going to be able to accrue the benefits by looking back on your relationship and seeing how they were really, really traumatic. We think that's probably true, but we think those benefits are only accrued at the point in which you split up or in which you no longer are friends with that person. Why is that the case? We think that's the case because generally, when you're in a relationship with someone, you're going to have rose-tinted glasses. You're not going to continue to be in a relationship if you don't think they're a good person. You'll want to make yourself feel assured that your decision to continue being in that relationship is a good thing. Meaning throughout that relationship, you're going to think, this is really, really good. We also think, as they said, you're probably going to want to forget about it as well, which means 5 years down the line, when you're reflecting on the entire thing, you're probably not going to reflect on that often. We think the only point where you can meaningfully reflect on something is once the relationship is ended, because that's the point where you no longer have emotional ties to this individual, and also the point where you haven't forgotten about it because it's traumatic. Therefore, the points where you can accrue all the benefits is the point at the end of the relationship. Okay then, why do we win on those benefits that you accrue when you learn about the relationship, when you have those really deep-seated emotional ties and they are broken? We think you accrue those benefits by stating that the majority of relationships are really short, are really unimportant, and are also, notably, with friends or romantic relationships rather than with family. First, I'm going to tackle why it's with friends and relationships rather than with family. We think it's going to be with these people because you generally have a much wider friend circle than you do with your family. You've got 5 people who you see regularly. In fact, your extended family you see unregularly enough that we also think we win on extended family because when they die, you're not going to remember the time that you had with them because you didn't have much time with them. What you're going to remember is the fact that they die, the deep-set emotional trauma that comes with the fact that you no longer believe that everyone is immortal. You have the experience of death. Okay then, so the majority of relationships are probably going to be with friends and romantic relationships because they can change over time, you have a wider circle, etc., etc. Why then are these relationships going to be short, and why are they going to be unimportant apart from when they end? They're going to be unimportant because A, most relationships happen when you're younger. We think this is for like a couple of reasons. Firstly, we think because it's like a long time, we think firstly because when you're younger, your social circle is the widest and you're most used to experimenting, right? We think you're going to like think, okay, I'm going to be with this person for 2 weeks. Actually, I don't like them. I don't know what it's like to have like a long-term relationship with someone. So you're probably going to experiment a bunch. Okay then, what impacts does that have? Firstly, it means it's a long time ago, right? We think therefore that the only impacts that can be accrued are the impacts that are accrued when it's like a deep-set emotional thing in your brain. They try to tell us that the deep-set emotional things will be the positive things because your brain wants to block out trauma. We think your brain does want to block out trauma, but we think it cannot block out trauma. We think the way the human brain in psychology works is that it focuses on the things that are worse because the things that it's going to focus on are the ones that can help you later in life, that can make sure that you don't like eat the poisonous berry again when it gave you like a stomach issue. We think this also applies to relationships. When something bad happens, you're going to want to reflect on that more than you're going to reflect on one of countless things that happened like mediocrely throughout the relationship. We also think young relationships never last, they're not that impactful, no one really cares. You're going to learn more about how to break up with someone in a way that's good. You're going to learn more from the fact that your friend leaves town and you have permanent issues. I'm going to take that POI now.
The chances of your friend betraying you in a relationship is astronomically low. If you are then talking about someone who you were in a bad relationship with, are you impacted more by what they did to you during your relationship or how you see them or the breakup?
We think this is just about the majority of cases. And I think the majority of cases, yes, friendships absolutely can betray you. We think when you're 6, them stealing like your fruit roll-up is enough for you to then like hate them for the rest of your life. This is going to give you like deep-set emotional impacts. And because as we've talked about, the majority of relationships happen when you're younger, happen when they're unimpactful. We think the majority of relationships are therefore unimpactful. We don't think you have enough bandwidth in your life to be able to have a ton of really meaningful, deep relationships. We also think like stuff happens. You're probably like not, unless everyone is like a perfect person, which we don't think is realistic, you're never going to have a relationship where it's all like roses and great for the entirety. Most people go through multiple partners. Very few people find their one soulmate and then exist with that for the rest of your life. We think it's very, very true that people can have like romantic and personal relationships that end in like a really, really explosive and a really, really bad way. Okay then, so then at that point, we think that teaching now starts to outweigh relationship benefits. Because as we've said, the relationship benefits throughout the entire relationship, because they're likely to be short, because they're likely to be unimpactful, are probably going to be really, really low because none of, like, for 2 weeks going to, like, a restaurant with someone, that probably doesn't matter. Like, mountain biking with someone for 2 weeks probably doesn't matter. At that point then, you're able to learn from things. We hear, like, a response from them that you're not going to be able to learn because the trauma is going to block it out. We think you are able to learn because it's probably going to be a short, unimpactful relationship. So you're going to learn more from the ending because that's what's going to stick with you for the rest of your life. The brain wants to learn from traumatic things and then wants to learn from good things. That's what we've already explained. Therefore, all for learning, which we can win on because most of the relationships, and again, that's only the majority, we're not talking like weighing on like severity or anything, are going to be relationships that are short, relationships that end badly, which then results in a really good learning moment. So proud. So fun.
I thank the speaker for their speech and invite the second speaker of the negating side to continue his case.
How you feel in life matters way more than the depth of how you feel this emotion. Because you can feel angry, and this anger can be incredibly deep, but at the same time, if you feel happy, even if this is more shallow, this is a different emotion, and I think it is more important in your life, and it should matter to you that the emotions you experience are positive and they change you in a positive way. A few things in my speech then. First, on some framing. Second, weighing up how you were changed versus how you feel during the relationship. Finally, on how people feel better on negating and how we are able to win today's debate. First then, on some framing, I'm going to reframe the debate. Note that this is going to be my split. What determines how much something matters to you in your life? The claim that we hear from affirmative is that endings are going to change your life, and explanations they give us are about how different endings frame how you view a relationship. The problem with affirmative's argument in this debate was that they didn't sufficiently engage with the comparative, because what matters most isn't just if the ending changes your life, but to what extent it is able to do so and how you are actually impacted. What matters more is the emotions that you feel, not if you are actually going to be changed. Because on our comparative, we explain to you why the lasting of a relationship is, first of all, intrinsically more important. Note all of Bella's very comparative analysis, but what we also exclusively explained to you were the negative impacts that come with focusing on the ending. We think that being able to feel impacted in a way that is positive is incredibly important and should matter to you the most in this debate, because how you feel changes how you're going to live your life. If you feel happier, this is going to matter more to you because now you are able to go to school and engage in relationships properly because you aren't clouded by negative thoughts all the time. It means you don't fall into slumps of depression and you aren't going to be incredibly sad and unable to engage with any other thing in your life. What this explains to you is that what you should care about in this debate isn't whether or not you are changed, because I think that the ending and the lasting of a relationship is always going to change a person, but what you should care about, what matters more, is actually what emotions you feel and how they are going to affect how you live. But look, why is the way you were impacted more important than the depth of the impact? And here I'm going to do my weighing about how you were changed compared to how you feel following the relationship. What this does for the debate is explains to you why how you feel matters more than the actual change. This is just going to continue what I've just explained. First of all, in order for you to ever reflect constructively on how you've changed, you need to be in a good headspace first. Note here that someone who is emotionally charged will always view everything through a tinted lens. They tell you this themselves when they tell you that if you're in love, you view everything through a rose-tinted lens. In the same way, if you feel angry at the end of an explosive relationship, as affirmative tells you it is going to be, you view everything through a lens of anger when you think about how your relationship ended. What this means is you never are going to achieve proper reflection, and all of your time is spent validating your anger instead. This looks like replaying arguments and noting all of your partner's flaws, noting all of their logical fallacies, and every single time they insulted you. It looks like thinking back to that time your friend stabbed you in the back and shit-talked you to their friend. These are all inherently negative things because you experience them every single time when you focus on how your relationship ended. Most people are never going to part with these initial feelings of hostility, which means that when you think that when you focus on how the ending of your relationship affected you, you are always going to feel negative, you are always going to feel bad. What you have to believe then is affirmative cannot claim their benefits, that people are going to learn more and reflect about themselves, because people are always trapped in a cloud of hatred and annoyance and negativity. Note that because they cannot unlock this impact, they have nothing else in their case to stand for. Because maybe it is true that intrinsically the ending is going to change your life more, but if this has no tangible impact to the people on the ground, they are still unable to win this debate. But on our comparative, we are able to shift the focus to how the relationship lasted, meaning you fundamentally focus on the more positive aspects of your life. This looks like reminiscing on that wholesome picnic date that you had with your boyfriend, or the super fun road trip you had with all of your friends at the end of graduation. Even if you break up with them, like in terms of friendship, in terms of moving to different unis, you were able to think about the positive ways that your relationship lasted rather than focusing on the ending. The implication of everything I've just explained is that to unlock the benefits that affirmative tries to claim, they needed to explain why people are able to constructively review what happened. We told you they are never able to do this when they focus on the ending that is going to be negative, as affirmative tells us. They cannot win this debate. But the second reason for why how you feel matters more is just that your emotions are much more proximate. I'm going to explain here why they cannot win this debate, even if they prove to you intrinsically that the ending matters more and affects your life. Because look, you're going to be affected by happiness, and you're going to be affected by emotions and how you live every single day in your life. And even if you change as a person, this is not going to if like this is not going to benefit you as an individual if you still feel very terrible. We think it matters more that you feel good about your life rather than whether or not the depth of the impact has changed. What you have to believe is that because your emotions are more proximate, you should weigh this debate in terms of who is able to get more positive emotions for people in terms of what matters the most for individuals. Because you can change on an objective level how much you are able to think about yourself. You can change objectively your self-development, but if you still feel terrible, that is still really harmful for you. So why do people feel better on our side of the house then? They are going to think about what lasted, and this is always going to be inherently good, because obviously in a relationship you get the benefits of having someone that supports you, of having someone to lean on, having someone to share wholesome moments with, like go to the park together, like have picnics together. These are all good things that you're only able to exclusively get on our side of the house when you're able to think about how your relationship lasted. Because when you think about the ending, that is when you think about your arguments. That is when you think about how you broke off and how you think about you're never able to be close to this person ever again. Before I move on, I'll take a point.
Okay. Do you, what matters more, a lovely, like, fluffy, cloudy, romantic date, or terrible impacts that come with breaking up with someone?
We think that having a good relationship is always going to be important, but we don't think the comparative in this debate is between having a fluffy relationship and a terrible ending. I think these things are able to coexist, but what is more important to you as an individual when it comes to how you feel in your life and how it impacts how you feel and your emotions is the time that you spent within the relationship. Because if you focus on the ending, every single time you think about this person, you're always going to think about the negative thoughts. You're always going to feel bad no matter how much you think you enjoy the relationship. But look, even if you didn't buy any of that reframing of this debate, why does the lasting of a relationship matter intrinsically? First of all, it is prior to literally every single thing that affirmative explains. Because for the relationship to end, it has to exist in the first place. So what you necessarily have to believe is that what happens during this relationship is going to affect how it ends. If you had a tumultuous relationship and while it lasted, if you had a good relationship while it lasted, this is going to affect the ending and all the harms that affirmative tries to explain. Second of all, they tell us about younger children. Look, I just don't think this is true because your most serious relationships occur when you're older. This looks like the abusive relationships we talked about. When you are older, this is when you enter into these toxic relationships. That is when you are harmed the most. That is when you have to focus on what matters more, which is the lasting of your relationship in order to actually grow and reflect. But even if it is the case, I think young people are just going to be also impacted less because they lack the cognitive ability to analyze what actually happened, so they're going to focus on what they remembered most. This is going to be their memories of building sandcastles rather than the one short argument they had or the one moment when their friend drove away from their driveway, right? So I think this explains to you why intrinsically it matters more. But finally, you are just in it for longer. If you spend 5 years of your life inside this relationship, this is going to be 5 years of your worldview changes. This is going to be 5 years of lived experiences that now change who you are. All of this matters more than the final argument that you have, because maybe the final argument changes you as well, but that doesn't take away from the 5 years of growth that you have already experienced. For these reasons, proud to negate.
I thank the speaker for their speech and invite the next speaker to come up and continue their team's case.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think what the opposing team fails to do in this debate is understand what emotions can do to a person and how they can both negatively and positively affect them. All right, 2 points of clash throughout this debate. The first is, why does the end of the relationship contribute more strongly to the effect it has on people than the duration? And the second, why does the ending of the relationship allow people overall to learn more? All right, the first point of clash, the effect it has on people.
We have continually told you throughout this debate that the end of the relationship is going to be the most impactful thing on contributing to an effect on a person after it's over rather than the duration. The opposing team's case focuses only on the fact that the duration is the thing that allows the end to happen. But that takes and forgets the whole point of the motion, which is how the end matters. In this debate, the motion is stating clearly that the end is what is mattering more. The opposing team is telling you that the end is only important because of the duration of the relationship. But this only contributes to our case, as it tells you that the end is important and is the most important thing you need to weigh throughout this debate, because it is what causes the emotional effects. It is what causes anything that is negative or positive to the person that experiences the end of their relationship. As well as this, the opposing team has mentioned things like, we had mentioned stuff about how abusive relationships, for example, people are going to have a rose-tinted view on it because they don't understand the actual bad things that are happening to them throughout this relationship, since they want to love this person and so they stay through that abuse. However, we've told you, or the opposing team is telling you, that this emotional rose-tintedness is going to happen after the relationship as well, because of the emotional turmoil people are going to be thrown into after it. However, I think this only backs up our point by showing that people aren't going to be able to realize the bad things happening to them throughout the duration of their relationship. Because of this, I think we can assume that at the worst case scenario for us, this point is symmetrical. Both sides of the house, it stands. But on our side of the house, I think it's unique, because at the end of the relationship, this emotional turmoil can lead you to get out of the rose-tinted lens. The anger that is put upon you can allow you to see the bad things that happen in your relationship. Even if you buy the fact that you only focus on the bad things that are happening throughout the relationship, you are still being impacted by the end of the relationship. No matter if you are only focusing on the bad or the good in a relationship, you still see the impact and you still see a very important effect on a person. And because of this, I think we more strongly show you this point than the other team is able to do, as all they are telling you is that you are blinded by emotions at the end of a relationship. And because of this, I think we win on this, as we show you that the end of the relationship is going to be the most impactful part of it, rather than simply the duration, which will, as the opposing team has said, be completely put away by the emotional turmoil you experience at the end of the relationship. Because of this, I think we win on this point, and I think it is more important on our side of the house that we've got this emotional turmoil at the end of the relationship rather than during it. All right, I'll take the POI.
This debate is retrospective. The relationship has already ended. Am I impacted more by the fact that my husband beat me every day, or am I impacted more by the fact that we argued and I got a divorce?
I think you are impacted during the relationship. And I think at the end of the relationship, you experience emotions towards that. You experience positive emotions because it is over. You do not have to go through that anymore. You have an extreme impact, and it matters extremely to you, as you no longer have to go through those things. And you can have the positive effect of being able to learn and grasp these things more greatly as you have the emotions to overcome it. This leads into my second point of clash about why the ending of the relationship is more able to teach people and allow them to learn more after it. All right. The main thing the opposing team has said about this is that at the end of the relationship, as I had previously mentioned, you're going to be clouded with emotion. You're not going to be able to see the actual parts of the relationship. I think this doesn't matter in this debate, as I previously said, as you're still going to be able to learn things from the relationship. Even if, worst case scenario, you're only focusing on the parts of a toxic relationship when you were abused, you were hit, all of these things, I think that is still a positive impact for the person at the end of the relationship. They are able to focus on the things that were bad in that relationship. And because of that, I think they are able to see the bad and they're able to grow from that. That growth is extremely important to this person and is unique to our side of the house and cannot be achieved on the other side of the house, because the duration is not going to show them this, as they are going to, as I previously mentioned, be in a worldview that is tinted and not correct, as they want to love this person and they do not want to see them as a bad person. Because of this, the end of the relationship is the enabler of this growth and of this learning to become a more complete and better person. As Maliki had said, it's like eating a poisoned berry. If you eat this berry and throw it up, I think you're not going to eat it again. I don't think if the duration of eating that berry is not what teaches you, you don't need to eat it again. It's throwing it up. You don't need to you can't get the learnings from it without the end. I think that applies very strongly within this debate. I'll take that POI.
When you look at the end of a relationship, it is defined by your argument. But when you look at the duration of the relationship, that is when you actually realize what went on. So why is the ending give you more emotions? Because
the ending allows you to look at the duration of the relationship. I think all throughout this debate, this thing of the fact that the duration shows you what is bad or shows you what is good is very mentioned very often. But I think the fact is the ending is definitively the thing that allows you to realize this. Without the ending, you cannot realize the duration. This means everything the opposing team is saying falls to the fact the ending is the allowing factor in this world, allowing you to realize the negative or positive consequences of your relationship. This is very important for both of my points of clash. It is the thing that allows you to get the effects. It is the thing that allows you to learn what you had, or the bad things, or the good things from a relationship. Without the ending of a relationship, you cannot see what was good, you cannot see what was bad. Even if you're following the best world of the opposing team, which is that you're going to not look at the whole relationship. You're still looking at some of the relationship, and some of the relationship is the bad things that are happening, the good things that are happening. Looking at these things allows you to learn, allows you to move on. It's going to be very affecting on your learning from the relationship. Because of this, I think we win this debate, and we are proud to affirm.
I thank the speaker for the speech and invite their neighbor to not communicate in this case.
I think the biggest mistake in their case is that they assume that you can never learn within the relationship. While you are in the relationship, you can definitely learn a lot of things. And insofar as we tell you that at the end of a relationship, it is extremely emotionally charged, it's extremely volatile in terms of how you feel, it means that you never learn anything. Comparatively, we say, the lessons you learn when you are baking cookies with your grandmother, the lessons you learn within the relationship when your victim abuses you, that's more important, because at the end of a relationship, everything is emotionally volatile. Comparatively on our side of the house, when things aren't that volatile, when you have a positive mind, when you have a clear-headed mind, that's when you learn most things. That is the biggest thing that we missed from their side of the house, because they gave us no explanation as to why all the learning just occurs at the end. We tell you that the learning and most of the learning can accrue at the beginning during the relationship as well. So, In the speech then, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring back Sarissa's framing because we got very little response from it. We got very, very little response from it. In fact, we only got one response. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to be charitable. I'm going to explain to you why most relationships basically just fizzle out. Most relationships that you have, not the severity of the relationship, but most relationships are just likely going to die out. So the ending never mattered to you regardless on their side of the house. Okay, firstly then, what does most important mean? I think both sides agree. Most important means like how much you can change, how much you can learn, and how much you can grow from this experience. We don't think that is contested. We think that's what both sides of the house stand for. But note then that my analysis is extremely important because insofar as I can prove to you in this speech that the most amount of learning occurs during the relationship, we'd say that's where we win this debate. That is the question that this debate hinges on, and that's why we're going to win. But before that, let me bring back some of Sarissa's framing because I think it goes heavily unresponded to. Sarissa told you that the most important thing in your life prior to any change is how you feel. Why? Because how you feel influences how you learn and grow from that change. If I've just broken up with my ex, I'm extremely emotionally volatile. I'm extremely angry. There's no capacity or space for me to learn. Comparatively on our side of the house, when you are within a relationship and when you are more clear-headed, that's when you can make better decisions. That's when you can learn more. And the example here, for example, is your grandmother's death. When my grandmother dies, I feel extremely sad. I feel extremely bad. That's all I feel. But when I'm working with her, when I'm baking cookies with her, when I'm learning how to read with her, I learn my grandmother's kindness. I learn how amazing she is. I learn and I grow from that experience as such. But the second reason why positive impacts were more important was just because of the time extent. Sarissa told you that it's 5 years of your life compared to a day when your mother dies. We think just intuitively, across that period of 5 years, you're likely going to learn far more and far more lessons compared to just 10 minutes. Because even if you say that, even if we buy the case that you learn a lot of the things at the end of the relationship, the important thing to know here is that you just aren't going to learn a lot of things. Maybe I just learned that my grandmother, I should have called my grandmother a few more times. Comparatively on our side of the house, you're going to learn far more things. You're going to learn how to bake cookies. You're going to learn how to have all these positive emotions. I bring up baking cookies because that's what I did with my grandmother and she really liked it. But the important thing to note here at the end here is that 1, on our side of the house, you will believe Sarissa's framing. Having a positive impact was the most important thing. It was a prerequisite for actually getting change. But even if you didn't believe that, you all buy that on their side of the house, they get less amount of change because they learn less lessons. They learn less things on their side of the house, whereas we have 5 years, 10 years, 15 years with our grandparents, and that's when you learn the most. That's when you learn the best things as such. So, the reason why I spent so much time on this is because this debate hinges on which framing you buy. I think insofar as I proved to you that 1, you should buy our framing, but even if you don't buy our framing, we still win on their turf. It will give this debate to side proposition already. Okay, before I move on to how most relationships end, I'll take a POI.
I love my husband. I defend him. My friends tell me I should break up with him because he's abusive, and I continue to internalize the fact that I love him and I care for him. How can I possibly learn with that mindset about my husband, about what a healthy
Perfect. Let me go into the next point of question in terms of what most relationships look like. If I can prove to you that most relationships are just ones that fizzle out, I think that will win this debate. Because that means the extent of their harm is extremely low insofar as toxic relationships are very little. So what are most relationships going to look like? Note that the motion says that it's most personal relationships in your life, right? So, for example, I only have 4 parents. I'm probably only going to have, 5 girlfriends in my life or something like that. But the important thing to note here is the quantity of relationships you have on their side of the house is significantly lower. Why? Because obviously you have to invest massive amounts of time into these relationships. You have to spend a lot of your effort putting into these relationships. So what that means is that you're not going to have 50 or I don't know who you are, but if you have 50 girlfriends, that's just very, very unlikely. What's more likely going to happen is you're going to have 50 friends of your life. You're going to have 100 friends of your life. And insofar as this quantity is greater, what that means is that most relationships are going to fizzle out. Why? Because it's everything that Bella told you. You're likely going to leave the relationship. Circumstances change. You switch schools. You eventually outgrow each other. So what you should believe at the end here is that the majority of relationships that you are going to face are the ones with your friends, are the ones with your buddies and your mates, because you eventually outgrow them and you have to constantly make new friends. This framing is extremely important because it removes a lot of their stuff, including their POI. If 80% of your personal relationships are friends, then I'm unclear as to why having toxic relationships on their side of the house is so damaging in terms of the extent of change that it creates. Comparatively on our side of the house, when you are with your friends and you reflect about the journey, you think about the core memories, you don't learn anything at the end because nothing happens at the end. You're able to think about your time where you went mountain biking with your friend. You're able to think about the times where you enjoyed and had lots of fun with them. That gives you more change because it teaches you more lessons and it gives you a greater impact in terms of the lessons that you learn. Okay, all of this analysis then should already win us this debate. Why? Because of Sarissa's framing. Because you should buy that already. But even if you didn't, we sufficiently minimized a lot of the impacts in terms of why relationships aren't going to look bad. But finally, let's just be charitable here and let's talk about these bad relationships. The first thing we just say is that obviously know what I explained to you. These relationships are just rare, so you shouldn't disregard them and you shouldn't weigh them highly in this debate. But secondly, we just say that at the end of a relationship anyways, it's probably not going to be that important because you're going to be emotionally charged. We say on their side of the house, you're going to feel massive amounts of guilt. You're going to wonder if what you did was correct or wrong. We don't think that gives you a lot of time because you're going to think about, my victim abused me, etc. That doesn't equate to change because that's what most people agreed in this debate. Comparatively then, what's most important is the lessons that you learn. And we tell you that in a bad relationship, you can reflect. If your husband abuses you, Sorry. The first thing to know here is that a lot of these relationships just aren't going to end, but you're going to grow increasingly dissatisfied with them on their side of the house. What that means is that you can still learn and you can still think about how your partner affects you throughout the course of the relationship. If they abuse me every single day and I do not end my relationship, then you should buy our side because you don't end those relationships, but you still learn a lot of those lessons. Comparatively on your side of the house, you only break up a few times and that's extremely bad. Look, at the end of the day, the amount of toxic relationships that you're going to have is going to be extremely small. Most of your relationships are going to look like the ones with your friends. Most of them are going to look like the one with your peers. Those are the ones where most change happens. But even if you didn't believe that, you all buy our framing. Sarissa explained to you why it's so important that you care about the positive impacts because that's necessary for change. But even if you didn't, most relationships were never toxic, and that's why we won this debate.
I thank the speaker for this speech, and as is tradition, we will now reverse the speaking order, so I invite the leader of the debating side to come up and finish their team's case.
This debate was never about whether the ending or the lasting of the relationship changes you. Because the ending and the lasting are both going to change a person for life because they alter fundamental aspects of an individual. The difference in this debate then is always about how you are going to feel. You can change and become enlightened. You can gain all of the wisdom in the world and of all the people before you, but you can still go home and cry yourself to sleep. You can be the smartest person but still feel terrible every single day. This ought to explain to you why you have to care about the actual emotions that you feel a whole lot more than any self-discovery you were able to get, because this is the only thing that translates to tangible benefits. How should you weigh this debate then? 2 metrics. First of all, you should evaluate how much something matters by the certainty of the impact that you get, and second of all, on exclusivity. First then, how do we win on the certainty of the impact to the individual? The framing that we gave you at the top of this point was that endings are all going to be inherently negative, because it means losing someone incredibly close to you. It means you lose a connection that you had, you lose a shoulder that you used to cry on. You lose someone that you loved, that knew you, that read you bedtime stories, and someone who baked cookies with you. You lose these salient relationships to your life that bring you love and bring you joy. This is always going to be an inherently negative thing. And when you consider the ending of a relationship, this means you are always going to feel bad. This explains to you why if you care about feeling good, you should care that the lasting of the relationship matters a whole lot more. But look, if you broke up with your boyfriend, you're going to think about the argument you had. These were the certain harms that you were going to get on affirmative. They explain to you why you're always going to experience negative emotions. What matters far more is also the certain positive material we brought to you about why the lasting of the relationship is more important in terms of it making you actually feel good about your life. Because look, All of affirmative's arguments were contingent on the fact that all people are going to react the same way to their relationships. And look, it is very, very hard to evaluate the intrinsic value of something if you don't tie it to a certain tangible impact. This is what we were able to give you in this debate, because not everyone views relationships in the same way, and affirmative never did the tipping point analysis, and they did insufficient analysis about why it is going to be most people who care about the ending more. So insofar as you think that relationships change you and they affect who you are, it matters most how you are going to feel at the end of it. I think we get the most certain change on our side of the house. The only tangible impact that affirmative tries to bring to us in this debate is that you're going to be able to learn. Look, how are we able to get this on our side of the house? I'm now going to move on to the second metric of exclusivity. What was symmetrical was that people are always going to feel bad in terms of when endings happen, so what you should judge this debate on is whether or not we're able to gain more through the time we spent together. The primary focus in this debate is on most relationships, and we tell you that most relationships are going to be good, so when you reflect on them, you feel happy, and this is also our primary path to victory. Because most relationships don't end badly. When you love a person, you enter your close relationships, a majority of them are not dramatic. This looks like when a relative or a friend dies and you learn from them, from the time that you've spent from them, rather than the fact that their blood stopped flowing that now that they're gone. It's when you grow apart from your lifelong family friend and the largest impact that they had on your life wasn't moving to another country, but it was from the daily calls that you had. It is from the time that you spent together. This should illustrate to you exactly why it matters more the duration you spent, because not every single ending is going to drastically blow up in your face. A lot of the times they are just going to be small times when you fade out. This should explain to you why most relationships, the lasting of the relationships matters far more. What do I explain to you in my debate and my reply is why we are able to get the certainty of the impacts on our side of the house. We are able to certainly make people feel better. You should believe that the lasting of the relationship matters far more in this debate. But look, just on exclusivity, we are the only side that is able to help people properly learn, because not every single relationship is going to blow up. Most of them are good. They bring you a lot of joy. For these reasons, never been crowded to negate.
I thank the speaker for their speech and invite the leader of our side to finish the team's case.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. What matters more in this debate, the bad or the good? I think we explained throughout this debate why the bad negative impacts matter significantly more than the fluffy, happy, good impacts. We explained to you this thing that's left unresponded to about how if you eat a berry and it's bad, your brain is going to learn from it. We talk about evolution, how it wants to make sure that you remember from the bad stuff so you don't end up repeating it. We explain how you're going to have a lot of good feelings, but that a couple of bad things are going to be really, really important. I think we explained sufficiently why bad things are going to be felt more impactfully by people than good things. We think that they have more scale of impacting later in life. We think you can continue to have good things even if you've had good things in the past, whereas if you have bad things, you often can't swing back and have good things. We think it's reasonably obvious that bad things matter more in this debate than good things, even with Marissa's framing. Okay then, how is this motion going to be weighted? How are you going to weigh this motion and decide who wins? I think necessarily you have to weight this motion on scale. I think we've explained this in my second speech. I think this was explained again at Max, and I think it's inherent throughout when you read the motion. This isn't about if you've got a couple of really impactful long-term 5-year relationships and whether the throughout or the ending matters more in that case. This is only about the scale of how many relationships are affected, because it's about most. I've explained this in first, in second, we explained it in first, we touched on it a bit in third. This means that if we have tons of minor relationships, which I think we've proven we have more minor relationships than major relationships, and those just slightly are more impactful in the ending, which notes they're significantly more impactful in the ending, we can win on that alone, even though the major relationships are going to have a further more lasting impact, because as we've explained throughout this debate is not weighed on severity this way, debate is weighed on scale. Okay then, who wins on minor relationships? Who wins on major relationships? And is there more minor or major relationships? Okay, who wins on minor relationships? I think we tell you sufficiently that we win on minor relationships. We explain you're probably going to forget the majority of things that happen throughout a minor relationship. We explain that a lot of minor relationships happen when you're young, happen when you've got like a lot of bandwidth to make a lot of friends. Again, left like relatively unresponded to. We think therefore you're going to have lots of minor relationships. They're going to last for 2 weeks. You're not going to remember what happens. We then impact that by explaining that therefore the point at which they end, the point at which you can learn, because traumatic stuff has massively happened, you're not just going to be absolutely furious at them, you're going to be able to learn how to better engage with the social situation, is going to be significantly more impactful than the couple of stuff you remember. We think you're going to internalize the bad things, as we've already explained, and we think the bad thing necessarily happens at the end and the good thing happens throughout the relationship. Therefore, we think in minor relationships, you absolutely can learn more, you get more affected, and like generally, we win this point on minor relationships. Quickly on major relationships, we think we also win the point on major relationships. We think in major relationships, you are not able to learn when you have rose-tinted glasses about the event. We think you are only able to accrue all the impacts and accrue all the benefits when in the end you break up and you decide, okay, what happened? Let's analyze this. Let's decide whether it was good or bad, rather when you've got rose-tinted glasses thinking they're good. Even if we lose that point, which we might, we still win because we conclusively win minor relationships. Which is there more of, minor or major? Again, we've explained any normal individual only has the bandwidth to be able to have a couple of major relationships. Otherwise, they have tons of minor relationships. We talked about how you have them in tons of avenue lives. You have it at work, you have it at school. Therefore, what have I proved to you in my reply? I've proved to you that we have more minor relationships than major relationships. I've proved to you that this debate is weighed on scale, not on severity. And I've proved to you that we win on minor relationships and that we probably win on major as well, meaning that we absolutely conclusively have to win this debate. So proud to have them.
So thanks for speaking for this speech. Thank both teams for the debate and invite you all to cross the floor and shake hands.
Good debate.
Thank you.
It's good fun.
Great job.